That's right. Welcome to Whoa Dad, Go Dad. My name's Dave Momper. I'm your host. This is a fatherhood podcast for new dads and soon-to-be dads. I'm a new dad myself, and I'm asking every day, great dads, what does it take? What does it truly take to take on the ultimate role? All right, let's get to it. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Whoa Dad, Go Dad. This year is kind of a unique podcast in the sense that I'm going to interview myself, which is a funny thing to do, I suppose, but I've actually asked an AI tool to produce 50 questions, and in the spirit of celebrating the first year of my role as a father, to create a set of questions that would be podcast worthy, would be interesting, provocative, and so forth. So I'm just going to go through this list of questions and answer some of the most interesting ones. They're all really valuable, by the way. The prompt I put in was pretty powerful and set me up for some really interesting discussions with myself. I hope you enjoy, and we might as well just get right into it. So this first question is, what was your first thought when you found out you were going to be a father? And I'll tell you, funny enough, some people might experience the news of being a father and have some trepidation because it's a massive shift in your life. Now, my wife and I weren't necessarily quite ready for the role in our minds and perhaps in our setting or our finances. Like, no one's really ready for it or perfectly ready for it. But I remember when my wife, Mac, said to me, I think I might be pregnant. And I said, I think the first words were something along the lines of, let's go. Hell yeah. Game on. And I'm just at that point in my life where, for one, at 44, as I record this, time is of the essence. I don't have, you appreciate where you're at in your 40s. You understand that, you're in the middle ages of your life. And if fatherhood was truly something I'm going to embark upon, I got to get started. Or why not get started? So I remember being absolutely ecstatic, excited, welcoming, and no hesitation. My wife, on the other hand, I don't know that she wasn't those things, but she's a little younger than me, and we had been engaged for less than 2 months when we found out we were potentially having this kiddo. And there was perhaps a little bit of holy smokes on her side of things. For me, the holy smokes was bring it on. For her, it was wow. And you could imagine, for various reasons, why that might be. So I was all in from the get-go, no hesitation, feeling convicted in my awareness of who I am and my trajectory in my career and our position in life and my partnership, frankly. Mac is an absolute baller of a human being, and I adore her, and I can't think of a better partner to raise a legend with. So game on. Number 2 is, how is your relationship, or how has your relationship with your partner changed since becoming parents? And I'll tell you, this might be one of the most significant shifts in life that has occurred in my world, and I think might be relatable to a lot of dads out there and fathers out there and parents out there. We love our little nugget. He's amazing, but he is now the absolute priority in our lives. And there is a sense of, one day my wife and I will come back together and reconnect on a level that we might have had previously that we don't necessarily tend to. It's still there, but we're not able to tend to romance and chemistry and that fire like we were, right? We're not able to wake up on a Saturday morning and just snuggle each other or get romantic. We've got a little nugget. We got to feed and bathe and, put a new diaper on him and all that. So it's pretty unsurprising that our relationship has shifted. There's still romance, of course. There's still a beautiful thing between us. But we do joke about how life is drastically different and how we might not even have the time and the energy to be fully present for one another, although we wish we could be. So there is that factor. And I wonder if anyone listening can relate to this and give us a little bit of insight. How do you reestablish your romance, your partnership, and maybe not reestablish it, but evolve it? And that's what I'm looking forward to. We had 3 amazing years dating each other, then getting engaged, where we got to basically be carefree and just young lovers and wander about the world with very little worries. And then, of course, you infuse a new character in your lives, and that changes everything. So there's a new version of our relationship down the road that we get to look forward to, we get to foster, and it's going to be different. It'll never go back to being the exact same, and I'm okay with that. I'm not even expecting that. And yet there's a yearning to find ourselves again in a really flirtatious, carefree, and connected place that is challenging to get to on not maybe every day, but a lot of days. So it comes with the territory. We acknowledge that, and yet it's there. So number 3, what has been the most surprising aspect of fatherhood? Maybe what has surprised me is my disposition on it all. The infusing a new character into the storyline, it can transform a lot. It can transform literally the setup of your house and the schedule of your days. It can transform, your rhythms, your habits, all that kind of stuff. It's a forcing function. But what I think has surprised me is how we've learned to not do too much proactive planning about what we think our environment needs to look like, or what our, even our living situation and the configuration of our home and our days. We had a degree of pre-planning on that, but the most surprising aspect of fatherhood has been the benefit, the value of kind of going with the flow, letting certain needs or certain behaviors of ours, certain strategies, be the response to something that we're experiencing firsthand. And versus getting worked up about every little thing or trying to actually solve for all the different aspects of fatherhood, we as parents have embraced the uncertainty, the constant change of plans, the last minute disruptions, the regimented, or historically you could be pretty regimented about kind of what you're going to do, how it's going to go, who you're going to hang with. And so the biggest, most surprising aspect of it is how fulfilling it is, or how much easier it is to actually just ride the waves. And in turn, you're kind of you're not fighting friction. You're not fighting that tension. You're just kind of letting, like water, you're kind of going with the flow, right? So perhaps that's been the most surprising aspect of fatherhood. And I would just admit also, just like I would imagine a lot of you, is like how much silliness and joy and happiness and love you get to experience. And the kid is not even, my sweet little boy, not even speaking yet, right? Not even hand-eye coordinated to play sports or to run around and wrestle fully, and yet we have a rhythm together, and how connected we are, and how much fun we're having already is maybe not a surprise. I was hoping for that, but nevertheless, a real treat in the experience of fatherhood. So this next question, can you share a particularly challenging moment from this year and how you handled it? And I'll tell you, the answer to this is probably worth an entire discussion and an exchange with my wife. The first, two things come to mind. One, if you've listened to this podcast, you've heard a little bit about maybe how the first few days of Leonidas' life went, how his birth went. And then there's a second aspect that I'll get into, but just to summarize, literally the first moments of him outside of his mama, having come out of the birth canal and into the world and being lifeless and breathless, it almost feels surreal at this point that happened. It happened for sure. I know it happened, but it's almost like there's the way things have turned out. He's such a hardy, robust little dude in the 95th percentile of his height and weight ranges based on his age and so forth. And, you wouldn't even know that he came out battling at this point. So it feels surreal that was the case. But I think, of course, that was incredibly challenging. You don't necessarily, you might rhetorically plan for a challenge like that, some sort of emergency, but man, when it happens in reality, you're basically flying by the seat of your pants. And it was a chaotic morning that Sunday, October 1st of 2023, and emotionally draining, physically exhausting, and that's just my experience of it. The conversation Mackenzie and I intend to have, reflecting on that day and those first 11 days when he was in the NICU, it was taxing. But being that it worked out how it has, it's almost poetic that the first few moments of Leo's life, he faced a challenging battle, and we were there supporting him. I recall one of the, I believe she was a speech therapist inside of the NICU. Just the sweetest woman. She'd been in the children's hospital system for probably 20 or 30 years. She's a veteran of the NICU. And she actually reframed it for us nicely. She said, just realize that within the first few moments of Leo's life, you got to demonstrate that you wholeheartedly have his back, that you are there for him 100%, and that you are, say, his biggest fans. And most parents probably feel that way early on, or from the beginning, or shortly after, and it's all come to life. But the opportunity to fully demonstrate that might not present itself for a little while. You're just feeling that sense of love and support, and we got to show him that. It was so beautiful in the first few moments, as crazy as it was. I'm holding his right hand with my left finger, or I'm hoping to hold his hand or have him hold my finger with his hand, but I kind of just had my index finger in his right hand, lifeless, breathless little hand, thinking there's no way this is how it's going to go. And in that moment, Mac declared his name out loud. And we had not necessarily finalized the decision to pick Leonidas as his name. And it was amazing to see Mac step up in that moment and lead us and lead him, lead us in the chaos, declare to the world that he has a name, declare to him that he has a name. And, it was a rally cry of sorts. It was a rally cry. So in the face of adversity, he stepped up, Mac stepped up, I stepped up. We all did everything we possibly could. And in hindsight, it's a beautiful, poetic, amazing thing. And in a way, I'm glad it happened, considering the outcome especially. Now, the other thing that's particularly challenging for us, we've never put our little nugget in daycare. We both work from home, and this is a double-edged sword, but we have, or a catch-22, you might say. We have the good fortune of being in his life since day one, 24/7, with the exception of a few nights where one of our friends might have babysat him. We have watched over him at our home, both of us working from home, figuring out who can cover when someone's on a call or someone has a client, or sometimes there are some situations where we're flying, we're out of town, so that's pretty obvious. We've got a little bit of a support system that has each other's backs and can give us a spell and support maybe a couple hours here and there. But that has been challenging in the sense that because it was an option and it was available, some people have to go to the office, some people don't have this option. It then made it almost, because it was so tempting and alluring to just have him home and to be able to watch him with the nature of our flexible schedules. It's like, why would we spend the money? Why would we also relinquish our stewardship to other people if we can pull this off? And yet it's been a lot to manage. For Mackenzie, most notably, because she's the provider of sustenance. But still, both of us, managing schedules, managing priorities, managing just personal needs and little things we got to go do. And yet it's been this beautiful thing that we'll look back on and I think we'll really appreciate. But there will come a time, and it's in the near future, where we will have some support, some childcare support, perhaps in daycare, perhaps an in-home babysitter or nanny or whatever it may be. We're beginning to talk about that to solve for that puzzle, but that's been a bit of a challenge. And then it's not equitable, it's not balanced between who's actually tending to him when we are both home. It's not necessarily a 50-50 thing. So Mac has had a full-time job, watched him a lot, and of course is providing him with the nourishment that he needs. In at least at this point, 13 months in, still probably 60% of his fuel and nutrition comes from breastfeeding. So sorting through that, supporting each other, making sure we are committing to the team dynamic and declaring our support for one another, stepping up for one another. It's there, but it's challenging. It's certainly challenging. This next question is about traditions. What traditions are you excited to start with your son? Now, I could think of a couple things like what I would like to do with him one-on-one, but also as a family. And this is our first holiday season coming up where we're going to do Christmas here at the house. For part of the kind of the season, we'll be here at the house. We'll host a few of our friends and family. We're going to put up a tree, we're going to decorate and so forth. And I just look forward to, in a way, bringing Mac's historical traditions, my historical traditions, and figuring out our family traditions for the holidays. And then also, what does it look like to create a cool, fun, playful, memorable Christmas season for our little one? And that's going to include, this year, we intend to go get a tree from the woods, really embrace the romance of the seasons and the holidays. And we have this perfect little nook up in our townhome, a bay window where it was designed for a tree, it seems like. So I'll look forward to those types of traditions. And then other family traditions that will be fun, going back to Wisconsin, going to Oklahoma, where we both, Mac's from Wisconsin, I've got family in Oklahoma. These traditions that, in a way, have always existed in our lives, just folding him into those traditions. Those would be fun. But I also think, what will be the traditions we create as a family. Getting into the woods a lot, especially as he gets older, and we get to, in the fall season, go for elk hunts or deer hunts, and maybe some turkey hunting in the spring. Teaching him those things will be really enjoyable, and just celebrating his little life every year. We threw down a big first birthday for him with all of our friends and a lot of our family, which is funny because the first birthday, of course, he's not going to remember. Let's admit that the first birthday that we put on for our kiddos is largely for us. It's almost a celebration of us being parents for 1 year, and Mackenzie especially being a mama for 1 full year. What an absolute transformation that has been for her and for me. And we celebrated Leo on his first year birthday, but we also celebrated ourselves. Number 6 is asking, how do you balance the demands of your career and fatherhood? And I got to tell you, I've put myself in a pretty great situation over the last 8 years building my business to the point where it's at, and I'm more in control of my schedule than I would have been if I would have stayed in a corporate trajectory. And as a independent contractor for a couple different consulting firms, having my own direct clientele, there are countless times in the last 13 months where I've had the good fortune of the flexibility to just be with him and with Mac on any given day. Imagine just a Tuesday morning, 10 a.m., it's his nap time, and I get to take a nap with him. Not that I need the nap, although it felt pretty good to take a nap the other day after some of our travels. But just to be able to be with him on any given day, not every day, but on any given hour in any given day, I probably snuggled with him in the last 13 months. Just think about 365 days, add 30, 395 days. I got to at least have had 100 naps with the Nugget, 100 plus times where he's fallen asleep on my chest on the couch, and I'm reading a book, or I'm watching something on the TV, or maybe I'm sending a text message, but I've got that moment with him. And certainly a good chunk of actual naps with the Nugget where he's just laying on my chest. And at one point he was this big on my chest, and now he's about 32, 33 inches. Just a hardy little dude. That's been fun. And it's also, having him in my life is a bit of a forcing function on my career. And I'm at a good spot in my career. That's perhaps the good fortune of having him later in my life, becoming a father later in my life than perhaps in my 20s or my 30s. I'm pretty darn convicted, and very confident in how to make the most of my career path. And there's a bunch of other things that I want to do to fold into it. So I am tormented at times between tending to him and having fun and living in the moment with him, and doing the work to get these other things involved in my career as a leadership coach, communication coach. But I also happen to have a very clear direction I'm headed with my career, and I'm not questioning it like I was when I was in my 20s and 30s, trying to figure out, well, what do I really want to do with my one life to live? I have the good fortune of having sorted that out pretty well. So with that said, I have the time, the autonomy, the schedule, and yet he being as real as it can be now, and seeing him grow up and being as big as he is now, I'm like, wow, what kind of life do I want to create for him? And how does that translate into how I prioritize my schedule? How does that translate into how I prioritize where I spend my energy and how I organize my days? And knowing that I'm at home when I'm working, and if I'm not committed to something that's truly a value add to my career path, I shouldn't necessarily be just horsing around on, say, social media or, catching I just started watching Lonesome Dove, the TV series. Like, pretty good show, by the way. But, on any given day, the best use of my time, that question, what is the best use of my time? He helps me answer that with great clarity and conviction. It's not always him. Spending time with him is not always the answer, but often it is. Or doing something that I can see is going to benefit our family and him in the future, the near future, the intermediate, the long term. Having a kiddo is a bit of a forcing function. It helps us really recalibrate and focus our priorities. And for that, I couldn't be more grateful. What have you learned about yourself through your relationship with your child? This next question, gosh, I suppose, I think what I've learned about myself or been reminded of is the power of being silly. And that's a bit of a knack I have. I've always been in my youthful days as middle schooler, high schooler, I was certainly, I don't know if I was the class clown, but I was definitely a silly guy. And I would draw on humor and playfulness to, probably cover up or to navigate certain things, to kind of sort through traumatic moments or intense moments, but also just to build connection and to have great relationships with people and to have fun. So now I get to be silly. I get to be the captain of silliness with my son, whether that's just right now body language that he can mimic, the sound of my voice in a bunch of different varieties. You should see him mimicking me dancing. There's a new country artist in the mix if you're into country named Zach Top. Sounds a little bit like the 80s and 90s country western singers, little twangy, and he plays on this with a few of his songs. So I'm in the kitchen the other day. Actually, this was in Michigan recently. We were visiting Michigan for a wedding, and we were all staying in these cabins on a campground type property. Tiny little cabin, a couple bunks that normally you'd have a bunch of kiddos on this camp, and it was a mixture of adults mostly and some kids, but not a very big cabin. Hardwood floors, and we're getting ready for the wedding, and I'm just dancing around, kind of a line dancing approach. Not that I really know what I'm doing with line dancing, but I'm quasi line dancing and being silly and singing along to this, and he starts mimicking me. And not only was he dancing, which he does a decent amount of dancing on his own, when he hears a good tune, he just starts kind of bumping and bopping up and down. But he actually, because he was walking, he started moving around and stepping around. And it was so fun to see him learning by emulating me. And of course, I'm trying to showcase playfulness and silliness in my ways. So I think that could be potentially the thing that I've learned most about myself, is that playfulness is one of my superpowers. Playfulness, silliness is one of my superpowers. And I recognize I actually leverage this in a lot of the workshops that I facilitate, a lot of the experiences that I happen to have the good fortune of leading or of contributing to, including this weekend when we were at this wedding in Michigan. I had the good fortune of officiating the wedding. And I'd never officiated a wedding, but I've been in front of plenty of groups of people. And I realized, part of my duty to this couple, who are some friends of mine, was to set the tone and have some fun and do that for them under the stress of a significant day like this and the emotionally overwhelming nature of this event. Can I soften that and do so with a little bit of humor? And can I set the tone for those in attendance with a joke or two and I had a blast doing that, and everybody loved it, which was such a treat to get some solid feedback. So just a reminder of how powerful playfulness and being silly and the ability to have fun, how valuable that can be. I would say that's what I've learned about myself, or been reminded through my relationship with my child. And perhaps thinking about setting him on not a single path, but it's actually taught me to recognize or to think through, like, how did my parents, I wonder what they were thinking as I came about in my early years, and I started showing off my personality and my interests and my character, and how did they respond to that, or how did they set me up for success? And what did I really want back then? That's still an interesting question for me to play with, but it's like, well, I wonder what he really wants right now. How can I reveal to him all the possibilities and then serve him up the chances and the opportunities to explore and make sense of the world, so that he can live a really exciting, fulfilling life and overcome, adversity along the way. Just something that I'm struck by as I think about that question. Number 8 is asking, what advice would you give to a new dad? In a way, that's the point of this podcast, right? Is to collect the wisdom and experiences of fellow dads on behalf of someone like myself who is a new dad, and to be able to apply that to your life and to your role as a father. I think if I were to try to narrow it down to things I've noticed or felt or sensed of myself, and other things that I've heard from fellow dads on this podcast, the advice that comes to mind is that deep down, I feel like every dad out there intuitively has the instincts and the skills and the resourcefulness to be a great father. Even if you didn't have a direct example of a great father, perhaps you had the opposite of that. I think we all understand that this little nugget, or these little nuggets that we have, that our job is to provide for them, provide truly the fuel and sustenance they need to be, to grow and to be healthy and to be strong and just to operate on a normal level, you might say. So a bit of that provide them with opportunities and a home and a great experience with friends and family, and then to protect them, right? We know these are our functions in a sense, protecting them from real dangers, emotional hardship to a degree, especially early on. We want to kind of shelter them and keep them safe, and as they build their own wherewithal and their own resilience, which they'll need one day. But for the time being, protecting them and then preparing them for the future. You have everything you possibly need to do those things. It does require a degree of awareness, self-awareness, and maybe even stepping outside your comfort zone, tapping into a sense of courage and conviction and confidence that maybe isn't accessible historically, but you almost have no choice. And I just think that between what we have internally inside of each of us, and then what I'm really trying to foster in this effort with the podcast, is a community of fathers who are committed to raising legends. You hopefully have a community that you can draw upon. You have fellow fathers and fellow parents, other parents, mothers and fathers, who are your sounding boards, who you can rely on and maybe fill in any gaps that are either perceived or real, that you notice, or that present themselves and reveal themselves, which is likely to happen when you have some kiddos. The combination of our own individual abilities and the people we surround ourselves with, you have what it takes. And that might be the key piece of advice. I believe you have what it takes. And if you can tap into that belief as well, you're going to create a really great environment and trajectory and the right conditions for your kiddo to thrive. So any self-doubt, any skepticism that you're not capable or a worthy parent, that is the voice in our head that is ever present, that has probably talked us out of taking great leaps in our career or pursued opportunities to go play music when we're quasi-talented or go play sports when we're quasi-talented, and we just we played it safe. So if you hear those same types of voices in your head, remember that they're just voices in your head. There's another voice back there that believes that you are an absolute champion and that you have everything you possibly need internally, and anything you might not have, I've got your back, and a bunch of other great dads are rooting you on to tap into those things, and reach out if you ever need something to fill in those gaps. So number 10 is a little bit similar to a previous question. It says, what does a typical day look like for you and your son? Our days definitely vary with our schedules. Mackenzie and I professionally have some days that are slammed with things, others that are a little bit more flexible and go with the flow, but definitely doing a consistent breakfast. A lot of times it's eggs and some cottage cheese and some butter these days, and there's typically a lot of playtime in the morning. He goes down for a nap sometime in the late morning. A lot more play throughout the day. Another nap in the afternoon. We're getting a decent amount of walks in around the neighborhood, and I'm trying to think if there's anything notable. I mean, the days they flip around a lot. There's no such thing as a typical day. There's a lot of fun opportunities for me to take him down into downtown Golden, just wander around and have coffee. The other day, Mackenzie was out of town completely. A friend of mine named Charles Lim, who's been on the podcast, had his 6-month-old join me on a Monday, had some lunch together with our sons, went for a walk up the creek. We've got a hiking trail outside our back door here that we often are on. So a little bit of activity, a little bit of playfulness, lots of nap time, lots of feeding times as well, and lots of park time too. We've got a little park around. We like to go down there. He's been learning. Walking on a static or a hard surface is one thing. Really impressive that he started walking when he did, and now he's learning to walk on uneven surfaces. So he's standing up on the bed or the mattress, which is squishy. So he's learning those things, and then even the slope, this little grassy slope, whether he's going down or coming up, it's a little bit of a different game, and the squishiness of the grass. So a lot of fun things where we're just exploring and watching him notice things and come alive, which is an absolute treat. So here's a good question. This one's pretty fun, and I might have touched on it a touch, but it's, how has your perspective on your own parents changed since having a son? And I realize this could be almost the entire theme of a full podcast, but when my dad had me, he was 28. So when he was 40, I was a 12-year-old. And I remember thinking, because we had this absolute bash for my dad's 40th birthday. And all of his friends came into town. We lived in a tiny town in the woods of Colorado called Kremlin, Colorado. And I had a bunch of friends come in, and a bunch of people surprised him. My mom, and I think it was one of our family friends named Dick Speece, crafted a, what would you call it? Almost like a throne out of a toilet seat, right? Because if you're over the hill and you're an old man, you're on the toilet all the time. And I just remember thinking as a 12-year-old that someone in their 40s as an adult is all grown up. They've got it all figured out. It just occurred to me, it didn't really occur to me that they're a work in progress at all. And I just reflect back now as a 44-year-old dad with a 1-year-old. As much as I do have a degree of my life figured out, I'm still a work in progress. I'm still growing, and I always will. There's constantly things for me to learn about the world, to sort out and to reconcile, and skills to acquire and so forth, and even awareness of who I am and how I operate, what triggers me, what gets me excited, what I'm really truly passionate about. And I recognize, gosh, my parents were just works in progress as well. And that didn't necessarily help me make sense of any particular thing in the past. I just recognized, like, I never thought that, right? As a little kiddo, you think your parents have it all sorted out and they're all grown up, but that just isn't the case. And to this very day, I realize my parents are still a work in progress in essence. They are, as much as they have more experience and they're older and they do have a certain amount of knowledge and wisdom and all that, this is their first time as well being human beings. And they are fallible, and they can get triggered, or they can get emotional, or they have interests and they have disinterests and all that good stuff. And so it just kind of put into perspective what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a parent, and that every parent is learning as they go. Even if you've already had a kid or two, you're learning as you go on those subsequent kiddos. The other thing that it's done for me is just, someone said this on an early podcast, you will never understand how much your parents love you, adore you, how much they want the best for you until you have your own kid. And I just think that's so true. My affection and admiration for Leo and my love for him, the yearning sensation I have for him to be happy and to be successful and to thrive, is pretty significant. And that's what my parents wanted for me. And you can't really touch the love your parents have for you. You can feel it to some degree, and hopefully a notable degree, but you can't exactly experience what they're feeling, right? And having a kid gets you a step or two closer to what it felt like for them to love me and to support me, and frankly, probably to be disappointed in me when I wasn't living up to their standards, which is kind of the flip side of it, right? Like the lesson my kiddo has taught me. Oh man, it's going to be funny because right now all I do is admire him, and he's throwing his hands around a little bit and smacking us in the face, not knowing that he's hurting us. And he's not really hurting us that much, but poke you in the eye if he's not careful. But of course he's not doing that on purpose. So there's a couple moments every now and then where you're like, oh, cut it out, stop doing that. But 99.9% of our life right now is just being in awe of him. But there will come a time where he disappoints me and Mac to a notable degree. And what that feeling must have felt like now that I do have a kiddo, what it must have felt like for my parents to feel let down by me, to feel disappointed by me, and maybe even feel ashamed by me, because I did some dumb shit as a kid. Nothing too bad in the grand scheme of things, but I had a few of my moments where they couldn't believe that their son was in this situation, right? And always they were learning opportunities, and they put me in a great position at this point in my life. But it puts things into perspective big time, and makes you appreciate your folks more than ever. And at 44, I've got folks, my folks are in their 70s. My mom's approaching 70. My dad's in his early 70s. And I hope I have another 2 or 3 decades with them. But maybe not. So it makes it even more special to spend time with my folks, knowing how they feel about me. And I couldn't necessarily appreciate that and savor the remaining time I have with them as well as I am now if I didn't have a little nugget to put that into perspective. How do you approach discipline and setting boundaries at this early stage? I don't know that you are doing too much disciplining at this early stage. Setting boundaries is pretty funny, actually. There are limited ways to set boundaries verbally. Even the word no, they're not processing that. In my experience, he's gathering what it means when we say no, but I also don't want to say no all the time to things. So a lot of what we're doing when we're setting a boundary, instead of saying no, we're just redirecting his attention. But funny enough, the boundaries we have set are more physical. And we live in a townhome. On the main level is most of our living scenario. You have an upstairs, a couple bedrooms and a bathroom, and then a downstairs where I'm at right now, which is a bit of a working space, creative space, office space, and a garage with camp gear and all sorts of goodies, and workshop benches and so forth. And the main level is where all of his toys are. It's where he plays. It's where we hang out. And the boundaries we've set, we have a couple baby gates, but we've also got a couple things that are just chunks of furniture which we use to actually wrangle him. We live in a smaller place. It's not terribly small, but small enough that too many gates would actually be cumbersome. So we put up these temporary boundaries or roadblocks just to stop him from going up the stairs in one scenario. We have a kitty gate, a baby gate on one set of stairs going down, and then we put this play pad that is often on the floor or tucked behind our couch, and we kind of position it on the stairs. And we set up boundaries with the resources we have in our house rather than necessarily getting all the gadgets and things you need to get. So really the boundaries we're creating for him now are around safety, physical safety, not letting him go, too far into the backyard. There's a spot where the dog does her thing, setting up, boundaries in a physical parameter to either protect or just keep him out of certain things. And we've moved a lot of our houseplants out of the way so that he can't necessarily grab them and tear them apart or pull them down on himself. So I would say discipline and boundaries aren't as in our face as they will be here once he begins comprehending life a little bit more. The other boundaries, I think of boundaries as structure perhaps. We're pretty good about putting him down at around 7:30 or 8 at night. He sleeps till about sometimes 6 to 7, sometimes 8, and 2 naps in the middle of the day. So they're not boundaries, but the parameters or structure that help him create a bit of a rhythm and something we can count on. What role does creativity play in your relationship with your son? I almost want to skip this one, but I think it's a great question. I kind of touched on this already. What does creativity and what role does creativity play in your relationships with your son? For one, being creative, being playful, as I mentioned just a little bit earlier in this pod, I think is a knack or a skill that we get to call upon if we want as fathers. And I also think there's something really, really special about improvising quite a bit. And in a recent podcast that's yet to be published, soon to be published, there's a gentleman who discusses improv and his background in improv and how every single moment is effectively improv with your kiddos and in life. And if you can embrace some of the tenets or the facets of improv and be light on your feet and ready for anything, you do have the opportunity to be more fulfilled or to have more enjoyment in the experience, which sometimes can be maddening or chaotic or hard or taxing. But to deploy creativity, for me, is showing up in the sense of improvising in the moments, learning to kind of go with the flow and not necessarily be rigid in my expectations, nudging him or guiding him to other possibilities, even just laughing, not at him or in his face, but laughing at the moments where, he might fall down, get upset, and then moments later, after squealing about something that probably felt pretty intense for him, but it's a fleeting moment, just kind of laughing at those moments and playing that yes and game. If you know improv, instead of but, you replace this idea in our minds or even expressing ourselves, yeah, but is now replaced with yes and. So you're constantly building on things versus negating or stiff-arming things and trying to replace them. You're kind of acknowledging and accepting, incorporating, and then building and making something new with them, which demands creativity, demands a creative spirit, and is itself a creative act. So I'm using creativity every day, plus just having fun, doing silly things, or, even right now, Halloween's around the corner, being creative with what's it going to be like to dress him up in, some sort of fun costume. How has fatherhood affected your physical and mental health? This next question is interesting. I would say both my physical and mental health have improved versus been compromised. My mental health, there's a degree of it where I do catch myself analyzing the world quite a bit and being more actively a healthy skeptic and cynic of the world, because I want to be on the lookout for him and any future kids we have. It's like, what's the world really entail? What's really going on in the world, and how can I maybe prepare? I wouldn't say protect, because you can't necessarily protect your kiddos from the world, but you can prepare them for the world. And eventually, you can protect them early on, but eventually they got to go out and do their own thing. So mentally, it has me more attuned to things, and I catch myself at least tending to all the possibilities. Not necessarily worried and getting caught up in some sort of, doomsday prediction of the world and just going into hiding or something like that. But recognizing there's some interesting dynamics in our world. Some are timeless, some are, ever present, and then at the same time, there's nuances that seem to be pretty unique to our times. But just taking more notice of those things. On the physical side, part of it is, having a little kiddo. Like right now, carrying him around is a workout. 26, 27 pounds of wiggling toddler in your arms. And a couple times this past weekend, we traveled with a car seat, but we didn't have a stroller with us, and a lot of carrying him around. And then imagine Mac and I getting ready, not wanting him to run off. Like one of us is holding him, or we're watching him. But if we are holding him, he gets heavy fast. 26, 27 pounds just holding static curls. And, you do that for a minute or two, and then you switch arms for a minute or two. So truly, the physical integrity of my body has probably been emboldened or strengthened because I'm holding him constantly. I'm also bending down and picking him up constantly. So I've paid attention to my mechanics quite a bit. Slow and steady movements. Do have a little historical back pain and things that I feel like, well, if I'm not paying attention, I could compromise, the physical nature of my bod. But yeah, physically feeling much more robust, and it demands that we take good care of ourselves. To be strong, to pick our kids up, to be physically robust and able to chase them around and so forth. That's important. And just to have energy in our lives, which, gosh, that might be my growth opportunity, is actually doubling down on my physical activity and my physical ability, not so much for the sake of strength, although that I would benefit from that, but for the sake of energy, to be able to keep up with not him necessarily, although eventually I'm going to need the energy to keep up with him. He's on the verge of running all over God's green earth. But having the energy to keep up with him, tend to him, be present for him, be present for my wife, be present for myself, kick butt in my career, do creative projects, keep in touch with my friends, check in on my family, do fun things on the weekend rather than just hunker down because we're exhausted. And I think the physical activity, getting more of a regiment, is actually probably my growth edge right now. But I feel strong physically and mentally. I feel prepared and equipped. And yet, out of 10, maybe it's a 7. So it's acceptable, but it's like, how can I create more durability physically and mentally, and be ready for, we're just beginning this journey, frankly, after just 13 months, there's a lot more parenting and fatherhood ahead of me. So something to be thinking about for myself big time. There's this question here: what children's books do you enjoy reading to your son, and why? There's not one particular book. I've read a bunch of his we have a great little library upstairs, a bunch of his books to him. For one, he doesn't have a very big attention span. Oftentimes you're reading the book and he just wants to turn the pages, or he wants to grab the book, chew on the corner of the book, or grab the book and throw it across the room. So attention spans are fairly short. I like the idea of being a narrator of stories when he is at that age. Maybe that's at like 3 and 4, especially 5, 6, 7, 8, where his consciousness is there. His imagination, he's wrangled his imagination. He knows that he gets to, well, maybe it's subconscious, but he's tapping into his imagination, and I get to prompt it and trigger it and like, activate his imagination, initiate ideas in his head with storytelling. I cannot wait for that. But frankly, what we're teaching him when we're reading him right now are colors and animals and shapes and just really basic stuff. And I think also perhaps associating these little things, these little symbols and characters that are on pieces of paper in a book are associated and correlate with maybe noises coming out of our mouth, words, and him having a little bit of that connection there. But we do a decent amount of reading to him throughout the day, here and there, maybe at night, but it's not yet consistent. Like, there's no story bedtime that we're nailing every single night. But I look forward to those things. And then I would also note a few of the books that are tactile are really special for him, where he can actually feel textures and maybe even see certain things popping up. Those have been nice little additions to our library that actually do engage him. Although a few of the books that have imagine a little window or a door that's another piece of paper that comes off the page, those are getting yanked off. Those are getting torn off. That's just how it goes. But reading to him in general, that as a ritual will be fun, and I love the idea of actually being a storyteller, that he remembers that his dad read to him and his mom read to him. How do you and your partner handle disagreements about parenting? I guess there's a pretty limited amount of things that Mac and I aren't aligned on. And I'm trying to think if there's anything that stands out to me right away. In terms of how we fuel him, how we feed him, absolutely aligned on that. We're feeding him a lot of adult human food rather than off-the-shelf baby pureed food. We're giving him a lot of just regular foods in little bite-size portions, of course. But he has 2 teeth on the bottom, 4 teeth above. He's biting into steak and chicken and burger and meat. He's biting into bananas lately. So in terms of nutrition, we're aligned there. In terms of how we want to raise him and maybe the way to discipline him, I think we're going to be really aligned. And as I mentioned a little bit ago, there's very little disciplining that we're doing yet. So we'll probably want to sort that out. But in a good way, we've had a pretty solid rhythm as partners in terms of how we're parenting and how we're partnering. There's perhaps a bit of not a disagreement, but a conversation here and there about just keeping things fairly balanced, not perfectly balanced 50-50, but just supporting each other and checking in on each other. Sometimes it's like, hey, I need you to check in on me a little bit more. And of course, I'll make that adjustment. But the good news is, whatever the issue is, we've got a great amount of rapport and respect for each other that we're addressing it head on and talking through it and sorting it out. There's this question about what fears have you faced since becoming a father? And this question, what it really has me thinking about is the good fortune that I might have in my life, where I wasn't fearful of taking on this role. In fact, I think of it as the ultimate role, something that I get to embrace wholeheartedly, that I almost feel designed for and ready for without hesitation. And I also have a great example in my own father, somebody to emulate and live up to versus someone to contrast behaviors from. If I had to really think about it, there's probably 1 or 2 things that I didn't like that my dad did, I guess. But for the most part, my dad supported us, championed us, my mom as well. They both equipped us with the skills we needed to thrive in life and taught us how to be kind and loving and all that. And I feel like my dad was a great dad to emulate. So some dads probably feel like, well, shoot, I don't know that I can overcome and break out of this habit that my grandfather and then my father and then now me, am I going to be subject to those same trials and tribulations that my father and my grandfather, my great grandfather were faced with? And some of that might be, bad habits tied to abuse or alcoholism or certain crutches we have in our life. And I hope I'm not taking this for granted or being naive, but I feel that I've got a pretty solid degree of footing and I'm ready for anything. Part of that's just an attitude. Part of it is where I'm at in my life. And my biggest fear about being a father is just setting him up to be a great productive human, and to combat that fear, if that fear is even bona fide. I don't know if I'm trying to admit that there's a degree of attention on that, not necessarily worry or fear, but at least some attention on it. And things like having this podcast and reaching out to my fellow dads and being intentional in many of my fatherhood ways is designed to combat that and set him up for success. How do you plan to teach your son about your personal values? This one, for one, it's taking inventory of my personal values. And then, cross-examining those with Mac and her personal values. And I think we're going to seize every opportunity, whether it's vacations, whether it's the day-to-day, whether it's, trips to the mountains, whether it's if we're, at a wedding and there's a lot of people around. We're gonna seize every moment as a learning moment, and it doesn't have to be straight, or it doesn't have to be in your face, straight on learning moment, but we're gonna seize the day. I think it's a constant recognition that every moment in your life and in his life, he's learning through observation and through example. And I know I'm going to mess up, and those in and of themselves are learning opportunities, but a lot of it's going to be through examples. It's going to be through some formal experiences, some formal rituals, you might say. And I think it also be through a variety of experiences, exposing him to a variety of experiences, a variety of ideas, a variety of people, and giving him, setting expectations that I want him to take big risks, to leap, to soar, to fly, and then letting him set his own expectations for why he might be doing those things, with whom he does them, how they actually look, teaching him to create his own standards and expectations, but giving him at least a broad expectation that I want him to be bold and audacious in his operating style, by putting him in a variety of scenarios and exposing him to a variety of ideas and people. But this is like, I want to flag this question and ask this with Mac. Like, what do we actually do? How do we teach our son these core values? What are our core values, our personal values, and how are we going to explicitly, formally bestow those values on him versus just hope that he adopts them or acquires them? All right, final question, and we'll call this a wrap. How do you see your role evolving as your son grows? Fortunately, I just had a degree of exchange about this very idea. I think between all my podcasts, this has actually come up in a couple different places. For the time being, my job is to simply let him, let his imagination run wild. And to be silly and playful and naive and, to make sense of the world, to help him with that a little bit. But for the first, for the next 5 years or so, I think my role is truly just to create a container where he gets to play. 100% of his world is about play. Even how he eats, what he eats, making that playful, brushing his teeth, going to bed, putting on clothes, activities, seeing people, traveling across the country, all of it is about play. And I recognize at a certain point, his mindset will begin shifting. His experiences will begin shifting. He will begin operating in a little bit of a more practical realm. And I heard this on a recent exchange with one of my podcast guests who has an 11-year-old and a 5-year-old. And he catches himself fathering them, each of them differently. Whereas his oldest, the 11-year-old, is living in a bit more of a practical, rational world now. And you can have more sophisticated conversations and exchanges. You can actually explain yourself, or you can explain the reasoning associated with certain decisions or behaviors with a little bit more practicality than you can with a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old. And so I see my current role being just being playful, knowing that eventually it'll shift to a more practical role. And even then, once Leo becomes a full-on teenager, stepping back even further and being more of a coach than ever before, for him, and just giving him guidance. But you might have seen or heard it said, but you can never really be on the playing field for your kiddo. They're on the playing field. You're the coach on the sidelines just watching them. You can never step in and play the game for them. And early on, you can kind of be on the playing field with them. Like I can just get on the ground and roll around and be silly and prompt his imagination. And at a certain point, he's got to play the game fully on his own. And I look forward to that, but I can also see that being a little bit of a, that could probably be a little bit emotionally trying, just to let go and watch your kid both flounder and fail and flail, and hopefully also make great sense of the world and find conviction and footing and all that. So that's about it for now. There's a number of questions. I only got to 20 out of the 50, but I'm going to pause there and wish you all well. Perhaps we'll do a part 2 here shortly. Thanks for listening in. As a reflection of my time as a dad, 1 full year under my belt. Technically, as I record this, more like 13 months of being a new dad. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to be a father. The ultimate role. I think we're in a pretty good place with the trajectory our little nugget is on. And I also recognize I have no idea what the future holds. I'm going to need all of you sharing your wisdom, your experiences. I'm so grateful that I've had a good fortune of interviewing and sitting down with so many great dads, lots of other dads in the pipeline. And I hope you look forward to those conversations, because I know I do. All right. Happy days from Whoa Dad, Go Dad. There you have it. That's been another episode of Whoa Dad, Go Dad. If you like what you're hearing, hit the like button, subscribe to the podcast so you get the future ones, and please spread the word and post this episode to your social networks. That's powerful. Perhaps the best thing you can do is share this directly with a new dad or a soon-to-be dad that you know personally. Let them know you're rooting them on. And indeed, drop a comment and be really a part of this dialogue on fatherhood with me. Let me know in the comments a question you want me to ask other dads, or just some feedback. How does this sound to you? What's helpful? What stands out about these conversations? I would appreciate that. intel as I grow Whoa Dad, Go Dad. I've got many more episodes to come, and I'm so glad you're here. Looking forward to catching you on the next one.
Whoa, Dad, go, Dad, here we go now. Oh, yeah, the ultimate roll now. Oh, yeah, here we go now. Whoa, Dad, go, Dad.